Good day, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you for Reason to Resist from Montreal, Canada on June 18th, 2025. In early May of this year, I traveled to Tehran to participate in the Soap Media Festival. It was my first visit to Iran, and it afforded me the opportunity to gain a better understanding of the country and its people. I was already aware, of course, of the West's relentless efforts to dominate and subjugate Iran and to demonize the Islamic Republic. I knew, for example, that in the 1950s, British and US intelligence overthrew the democratically elected government of Mohammad Mossadegh, and that they did this to prevent Mossadegh from nationalizing the Anglo-Iranian oil company. I also knew that the US and other Western states had supported the regime of Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein after he launched a war of aggression on Iran in 1980. During that war, which killed hundreds of thousands of Iranians, Western states helped Iraq to develop chemical weapons, and US intelligence helped Iraqi forces to use them on Iranian troops. I knew, of course, that Donald Trump had ordered the assassination of Iran's top general, Qasem Soleimani, in 2020, just before he departed the White House. And I also knew that on April 1st of last year, Israel attacked the embassy complex of Iran in the city of Damascus, which is now under the control, by the way, of a Western-backed terrorist. However, I knew precious little about the actual conditions within the country and about the people of Iran who currently live there today. In one of my reports from Tehran last month, I walked the streets of the city and attempted to give my audience some sense of what life was like in this extraordinary capital of Iran. And I can only imagine how drastically life has changed since then. And I'll put a link to that report from the streets of Tehran in the description to this video so that you can see for yourself, at least try to get an idea of what conditions were like before this criminal war of aggression was launched. One of the people with whom I met in Tehran is Sara Sagaii. Sara is an Iranian-Canadian educator and activist. I first met Sara in 2020 when I was running to be the leader of the Green Party of Canada, and at that time, Sara was living in Vancouver on the west coast of Canada, and she happened to attend one of my campaign events in that city. And before I went to Tehran last month, I did not know that Sara had returned to Iran from Canada and had taken up residence in Tehran. And she's kind enough to join us today, not from Iran, but from Cairo. Thank you for joining us, Sara.
Hi, Dimitri. Thanks for having me.
And before we begin, Sara, maybe you could just briefly tell us why you're in Cairo and not in Tehran today.
Yeah, it's a really strange situation. My life is very strange right now. I initially came to Cairo for the global march to Gaza, not knowing that within a few days, my life was going to turn upside down. And now I'm kind of semi-stranded in Egypt because all the flights back to Tehran are canceled. I originally had my flight back for tomorrow, but it's been canceled. And right now I'm staying with friends and hoping for a way to get back to my country soon.
And you have family in Iran currently, correct?
That's right. Yes.
All right. Well, let's talk about conditions there. As has been widely reported, Israel and its Western backers have murdered numerous Iranian scientists during the past few days. You informed me a couple of days ago that your family was personally acquainted with one of those scientists. Could you tell us about him and the circumstances of his death as you understand them?
Yeah, on the first day of the attack, I woke up to just a flood of messages on my phone, and some of them were from my mom telling me that our acquaintance, someone that we were neighbors with a long time ago, not recently, I think. I don't exactly remember because I was very young, but sometime around 30 years ago, we were neighbors with and very good friends. Was the target of one of the attacks on residential buildings in Tehran. His name is Dr. Minucher. He was a top nuclear physicist, and they were engaged in his lab and his team were engaged in research on using nuclear technology for developing novel cure for cancer. And this was in the news actually a couple of months ago. I think I remember seeing it on press TV, but not so much outside Iran. But it was reported that Iranian scientists are developing or have reached a certain stage of development of a new, basically, treatment for cancer. Um, I don't personally remember him because this is from a time that my parents were friends with the doctor and his wife when I was young, but uh, but we have photos together, and my mom knows them closely. I know about the building that they bombed. And the number of civilians that were killed in the entire, basically the entire building was leveled. I since that I've learned about other people who lived in the building who have all been killed. There's a young woman who I believe was a poet and an English teacher. I think she was 20, early 20s. Her photo was shared a lot. She was in the same building. If I'm not mistaken, there was another young woman who was a Pilates instructor. It's just, I mean, they're just everyday people, and these are scenes that we never thought we would see. Never thought. I mean, I'm not saying we are Iranians. As Iranians, mm, we're different from anybody else who's under imperialist aggression. That somehow other people deserve it and we don't. I'm not in any way saying that, but for, I think, for any Iranian looking at the casualties, at the people who are dead, who have died, at their faces, their lives, I think not just Iranians, anyone living any kind of life around the world probably can see themselves in those victims. And I don't know how other people are living with this situation, because I can tell you, for Iranians, it's just tearing us apart.
Dr. Munashed, I understand you may have said this, but I just want to be sure people understand that it wasn't just the doctor who was killed. It were his family members. Uh,
Entire
who,
families.
who exactly in his family was killed in that murderous strike?
We don't exactly know. I think we do know that his wife was there.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, I haven't been able to. He had two sons, but I don't know if they live with the family. I mean, they are. They are. I don't. Yeah, they're not young. Their kids are not young, but I don't know if it's possible that they were with the family or not. Unfortunately, I at this point I don't have any news of the kids, or
Mhm.
what, where they're at, if they were with the family or not. It wasn't reported, and I mean, the focus is so much on reporting the the civilians. I mean, scientists are also civilians, but when
Mhm.
someone ends up on a target list, I feel like they don't get as humanized, even though they're just a scientist.
Mhm.
So unfortunately, we haven't gotten any further information, and I don't think my parents. I don't think they knew anyone who knew them. It wasn't a close friendship, so that's why we haven't been able to get any further information about. But so far, I mean, so far the assumption is, at least definitely him and his wife. So far, the assumption is there are no survivors from the family. But
Mhm.
I'm hoping that's wrong.
Before we talk some more about what's going on in Iran today, I want to talk to you about how you came to live in Iran again. Um, you know, I knew you to be, and you are unquestionably, um, a person of a progressive orientation, shall we say. You've been very, very active in the cause of social justice and peace, particularly when you were living in Vancouver. My impression of you has always been that you're secular. You lead a fundamentally secular lifestyle, although you and I have never talked about your religious beliefs per se, but I certainly don't have the impression that you're a religious conservative. Um, and you seem to be leading a comfortable life in Vancouver, which is a city that many, many people want to live in, and it's widely considered to be one of the nicest places to live in Canada. It was quite surprising when I learned that you had decided to take up residence again in Iran. Can you tell us why you made that decision? And I mean, and not just with respect to what it was that drew you back to Iran, but what is it that caused you to think that maybe Vancouver wasn't the place you wanted to live?
Yeah, yeah. I'm happy to talk about this because this is actually, considering everything else that's going on in my life right now, this is one of the happiest subjects. So we can, yeah, it's definitely, it's, um, it's good to talk about this because, yeah, I think it was a multiplicity of factors. It wasn't just one thing. And I also didn't really make the decision. I feel like I didn't make that decision. I just got to a point where I felt like I had to get out of Vancouver, and I didn't have a reason to go anywhere else to live or to move anywhere else. But when I went back to Iran for a brief period initially, I felt like I had the wrong impression of Iran, which is a strange thing to say because I grew up in Iran. But
And sorry, Sarah,
I
what you said when you went back, what year was that?
this was the fall of 2021.
Okay, sorry, go ahead.
I had Yeah, so multiple things in my personal life, like I got laid off from my job because of COVID that summer. This was a university job that I had for 7 years, and it was very shocking to me because I felt like I thought I had for years, I thought I had some level of stability and job security, and suddenly you realize you don't. Um, and the second thing was I was having a lot of health problems, just kind of chronic pain issues, and I wasn't able to get any level of support from the Canadian healthcare system. Um, and then I got to a point where I just felt like I'm not doing anything with my life in Vancouver, and I'm just suffering. I was just suffering, and I was spending a lot of money just to be there, and I didn't have a job, and it felt very scary. It felt very unstable, and it felt uh, deeply just like a really dark period in my life because Vancouver also has a way of making you feel like this is the end of the world. Maybe it's because it is literally like geographically it's the end of the world. So you kind of feel like you don't have anywhere to go from here, because I don't know, people who live out in the east, they feel like they should move to Vancouver, because Vancouver is supposedly, the weather is nicer, it's prettier, or what have you. It has this reputation. But when you're in Vancouver, where can you go? You can only go to the States. But I didn't want to go to States. I'm definitely not, especially with since Trump and the travel ban. I was never interested in the States. I've traveled in the States a lot, and I never felt like I'm more interested in the quasi social democracy that Canada has. So I was never interested in that. So where do you go from there? And it just gives you this feeling, Vancouver gives you the feeling that if you are not thriving, then something's wrong with you. It's your problem, it's your personal problem. And maybe this isn't just Vancouver, maybe it's Canada in general, and maybe this is just the West in general. Maybe this is, an extension of the American dream. You're supposed to make it on your own. You're supposed to um, be successful. If you're not, it's your shortcoming because everything is provided for you because the system is set up for the small people to be able to pull themselves up by the bootstraps and so on and so forth, all the stories that we hear. And this is so deeply ingrained in people. And even for people who immigrate there, for someone like me who didn't grow up there, I felt like I was constantly faced with this message in the Canadian society, in the Vancouver society, especially that either you make it and you're happy and you're not complaining and you have enough money and you have all the things and you live the happy life and so on, or something's wrong with you. You're a failure. You're a loser. Done. Right? It's never a reflection on the system. It will never become a criticism of the system. And I think I was revolting against this just internally, at least since I arrived in Vancouver. I think the first time that I saw the downtown east side, which is the area in the east side of the downtown Vancouver, which is the homeless area, I guess, for the lack of a better word. There's a large population of homeless people, people who are struggling with addiction, people who are struggling with mental illness, A large population of that community are indigenous people. It's at the intersection of a lot of different, I guess, forms of oppression, you could say. I remember the first time I came across it, literally like the first few weeks that I was in Vancouver. I was staying with this person who, my host basically, and she took us, me and my friend, she took us on a tour of the city, and we drove past this area, and she pointed to them, and she said, these are people who unfortunately have made some bad mistakes in their life, or bad choices in their lives. And I was just so boggled by that statement. I was like, what does that mean? I've never heard this before. What choices? What are you talking about? Why are they in the shade? You look at the people, are like, why are they living like this out in the open? Why is no one doing anything about it? So I was having this immediate, I think, human reaction to what I was seeing. And this one was trying to pass on the propaganda that you hear about, homeless people or people who struggle with addiction and so on. And I wasn't able to accept her talking point. So I think, just from early on, for me, this was an unacceptable society. The way it dehumanized the whole range of people, essentially anyone who wasn't even like, it's not even about being a success or a failure. After a while, it became about like, are you complaining or are you happy? If you're complaining, you're probably a loser, right? Even if you have everything, the definition of success is just, there's something wrong with you. Why can't you just enjoy that? Because this is the peak of human achievement. This is the peak of civilization. This is what the entire world has to offer. And for me, because I grew up in Iran, I think I always had that contrast in my head. Iranian society is fundamentally different. We don't hold those values. We have very different values. We have a very different way of looking at life. And I think there was always something missing in the Canadian society. And I think it's true for a lot of immigrants. If I'm honest with you, I'm hearing this more and more, especially since I moved back. I've been hearing it more and more from my Iranian immigrant friends who are telling me the same thing. I had a conversation with a friend recently who said, I never understood why you left. Until recently, I got very stable in my job and I bought a house and everything. And then suddenly it felt like I didn't have like a next step. And suddenly I felt like, why am I here? What am I doing? So I think people just get trapped in this rat race. They want to make it to the next step and the next step and the next step. But once they quote unquote make it, then they suddenly look around and they realize this whole thing is very shallow and pointless. This isn't the life they wanted. I'm hearing this a lot from my friends, from people who are or were in similar situations as myself in Canada, who are feeling like they should move back to Iran. Now, of course, the last few days it's a bit different, but the last few years I've been hearing this sentiment quite a bit.
And when you went back, first of all, how old were you when you moved from Iran to Canada?
I was 21.
And you indicated you were not getting the help you needed from the Canadian healthcare system. Was the situation
Mm-hmm.
in terms of dealing with your health issues when you were in Iran, when you returned to Iran?
Yes, that's what I discovered because I just happened to find a physiotherapist who, just by like basically the first session I had with him, he was basically immediately like, "Here's your problem." He described exactly the problem that I was having, my symptoms, diagnosis, and what the course of treatment would be. Something that I wasn't getting in Canada at all. I actually ended up getting diagnosed with fibromyalgia, which is something they diagnose a lot of women with these days in Canada. And it's just it's a ghost syndrome. It's not even a disease. It's just a collection of symptoms that they can't explain. But when the doctor in Iran, I spoke to him, he basically explained to me, this is a problem I've had since childhood. I've had spine problem, like structural problems with my spine. And he explained to me exactly the kinds of pains that I was having, why and how they were related to my spine problem, not some ghost thing that was just happening for no reason. Um, yeah, so I mean that alone, I know a lot of people in Canada who are suffering from a lack of diagnosis. I mean,
Hmm.
even without getting the treatment or being able to get a treatment, or whether or not your problem has a treatment, can be treated properly, just having a diagnosis, having an understanding of what is happening in your body when you're ill, it's such a huge thing. It was really eye opening for me, because suddenly with this understanding, I could manage my life in a different way, and with more awareness.
Yeah. And someone like me, I've been living there, I was born in Canada, you know, way back when during the Vietnam War. That's how long ago. And I can tell you, Sarah, that there has been a dramatic and steady decline in the quality of healthcare in Canada. And it just maddens me when I see things like, the new prime minister, whom I refer to as Prime Minister Goldman Sachs, suddenly announcing he's going to increase military spending by $9 billion a year, which is a lot of dough for Canada, even though the healthcare system is in stark and rapid decline. It just drives me insane. In any case, um, you said that when you went back in September 2021, you were surprised by Iran, and you mentioned one, important aspect of your experience, the healthcare. What else surprised you about Iran when you went back?
I think I wasn't prepared for how much the lives of, I want to say young people, but that's a loose term because it's going to include me, and I'm not really a part of the young people. But people like myself and younger. I wasn't prepared for how much their lives were just very similar to lives of people anywhere else that I've seen. In my head, Iran was very culturally different and isolated, and not as much in touch with like the cultural trends in the West. But I met a lot of new people, and I suddenly felt like it's not that different. Like I can have it is different, and at the same time not that. Like there is a shared cultural understanding that is the Western culture. I mean, it's terrible, but it is what it is. Like people are basically a lot more connected to the Western culture than I had expected. Um, Now, I'm not saying this is a great thing or anything. It's just that when you leave your country behind, there's always a part of you that feels like the people and the life that you left behind are still there. They're stuck in the past, which is just a false um, understanding. Of course, it's just how you feel because you left, and you think they stay there, but really, like, I wasn't prepared for how much they had moved on to a very different life, a very different society. Iran society has changed just fundamentally, I can say, since the time of even I, like 15 years ago, 15, 16 years ago, when I left the country. um, and I've never seen any society that has changed so much in such a short period.
And when I met you there, you were not, as many women were not wearing was not wearing a hijab. And I was amazed because of what I had been told about the country to see that. I mean, if I had to estimate, I would say that somewhere between like 30 and 40% of the women who were walking the streets of Tehran were not wearing any head covering. And I never once saw any woman who wasn't wearing a head covering uh, undergo harassment, either by, somebody who appeared to be a representative of the state, or by a private citizen who was offended or anything like that. I didn't see anything like that. So, that was quite a surprise to me personally. Were you surprised by the degree to which, uh, I mean, obviously, uh, I'm sure you would agree that there are things one can criticize in the status of women in Iran, but were you surprised by the degree to which women uh, led lives not dissimilar from those that women lead in the West?
Hmm. Yeah, I think I was really surprised by how liberal the society had become, not just in terms of women and how they dress, but in general. This is part of the fundamental change that I'm describing. I think I just found a lot of people had embraced just liberal values. That wasn't something that I grew up with in the country. Um, in terms of the way women dress and the things that women do, yeah, that was also different. Now, I should mention that in 2021, that's before the women life freedom movement. And a lot of what you saw when you came to Iran last month was something that came to be after that movement, which is not to say that before like women um, weren't dressing the way they wanted. It's just that I was shocked. I remember very much how, like, when I was talking to my friends back in Canada, I was telling them about how shocked I am at the types of outfits and the way people appear, women appear freely in society. And I think it was a period where the whole infamous what do you call it, the hijab police, where the morality police, I think they call it, they were basically not around that the period that I was there. They weren't around, and people were dressing pretty freely, but it wasn't as large a percentage as you're seeing now. And I think that what happened in Iran was that the Raisi government tried to forcibly bring back the morality police in the summer of 2022, and because this was after a period of freedom and liberalization, I think this is what led to this extreme outpouring of anger that we saw in 2020 and the fall of 2022. Um, because I think people were like, no, we're not returning to that again. We're not having that again, right? And what we see today, I want to say so much of it came out of that movement and the anger that women had from basically being pushed around so much by the state and being told how to dress and being treated in these demeaning ways. I think of the woman life freedom as the movement of the Iranian women for reclaiming their dignity as women. And the way you dress is only a symptom of it, or a part of it. But if the society can respect your agency over your body and the way you appear in a society, I think that's a good step. And I'm really um, amazed by how much, not so much the government necessarily, but the society accepted women after that movement, after that uprising. And the society accepted what women were demanding. The demand was that we don't want to be pushed around anymore. We don't want to be told how to dress. Maybe I want to wear a headscarf, maybe I don't. But you don't get to treat me in this way just because I don't, right? And I think that's what we're seeing today on the streets of Tehran is the fact that women have claimed that space for themselves. So compared to 20 years ago, when I was a teenager on the streets in Iran, you don't see as much lewd remarks or catcalling or harassment and things like that, which were pretty common, maybe just like a lot of other places in the world. But nowadays is just very strangely, you don't experience almost none. You experience almost none of that. Like, I don't want to idealize it in any way. I mean, I'm sure people experience it in some ways, but a particular form of harassment that used to exist in a very strong way on the streets of our cities have virtually vanished. And I think that's a huge achievement.
Yeah. I can tell you when I was a boy and was brought to Greece by my parents, where they were born and raised, that kind of harassment was a daily experience for women in the streets of major Greek cities, particularly in Athens. My sisters, I had three sisters at the time, and they all experienced it. And today, you almost never see it either, which is interesting. So it sounds like in that respect, Iran has undergone a similar. Obviously, there are differences, but a similar transformation to what we've seen in the status of women in Southern Europe, um, and other parts of the Mediterranean region. In any case, I'd like to return to what is happening today, Sarah. Um, could you just tell us generally, based upon, we talked about the specific instance of the nuclear scientist. Based upon your discussions, your communications with your friends and your family in Iran, what are the conditions in Tehran at the moment?
Well, I think it was 2 days ago when Israel issued an evacuation order for the District 3 of Tehran, which is where my home is, which is where you and I met not that long ago, which is where the state TV building is located that they bombed. And it's where a lot of my friends in my community live. It's a very, very dense area. It's not like 2 blocks that people can just move from here to the next block and be safe. It's basically when they say evacuate District 3 of Tehran, I don't see any difference in that with saying just evacuate Tehran. And evacuate Tehran is evacuate Iran. It's no difference. How you can't tell 17 million people to just evacuate. It's not. And also, as somebody said, we're not renters. This is our homes. You're not our landlord. You don't get to evacuate us. So there was a lot of anger and confusion and panic after that, which is exactly what their goal was, just like they did in Gaza. Of course, they bombed places outside of the district, as they did in Gaza. It's definitely, as it's been proven, when they target a certain district, it doesn't mean that other places are safe. So I think people were debating whether they should leave or not. What does this mean? And I don't believe, after hitting the state building, I don't believe there was any other major targeting that was restricted to that district. They've been hitting all over the city. So clearly that was just a terror tactic. And then Trump came in and tweeted and said, evacuate Tehran. So it was not restricted to any district at all. All of this is, to some extent, unfortunately, is having the desired effect, which is throwing the population into a frenzy for people who are able to leave to pack up and leave. A lot of people have been rushing out of Tehran over the last couple of days. Now, I have friends who have left, and I have friends who have stayed. And I think it has come down to a personal decision for people. I have a friend who is a very close friend of mine, and she's my neighbor as well. And she lives alone with her dog and 2 kittens. And I've been in touch with her throughout the last 5 days, and I keep telling her that she should probably leave, but she insists that this is my home, and if there's one thing, this is what she tells me, if there's one thing we've learned from Gaza is we don't leave our homes. And she's updating me on her situation. I think her entire neighborhood has pretty much emptied out. And she's now scared because of that. She's scared because she's the only person in the neighborhood. And what if there are break-ins? What if it becomes, an unsafe situation because no one lives in the neighborhood anymore? Which, again, I think this is the desired effect of the Israelis. They want a reign of terror in Tehran. Even if they can't achieve it through bombs, they can achieve it through their tweets and through their threats. But at the same time, a lot of people are staying. And I've seen people are starting up mutual support groups, checking on their neighbors, checking on the elderly, checking on even like street cats and the disabled and anyone who they know in their community who needs support. I'm seeing those things happening anecdotally, and this is very much the spirit of Iran, I think.
Right. We've been arguing on Reason to Resist until we're blue in the face that this war of aggression on Iran really has nothing to do with Iran's nuclear program. As we have pointed out repeatedly, earlier this year, the U.S. intelligence agencies collectively opined in their annual threat assessment that the Iranian government was not seeking a nuclear weapon. And this has been the consistent judgment of U.S. intelligence agencies for over 20 years, going all the way back to 2003. There's the fatwa of the supreme leader against the development of nuclear weapons. They had not enriched even the IAEA which has been biased in its treatment of Iran, in my opinion, acknowledged they had not enriched beyond the point of 60%, and they have to enrich beyond the level of 90% to develop a nuclear weapon. So, what is this all about? A lot of us have been saying that this is really about regime change. And there's a support for that in the fact that they have invested so much energy in killing people, who are senior figures in the power structures of the country. Um, do you agree that, I mean, from your perspective, is that a core objective and perhaps even the overarching objective of this war? And if it is an objective that you think that the Israelis and the US are pursuing in how they prosecute this war, do you see indications that people en masse are turning against the government? I mean, that there's more opposition to the government than there was previously? Or do you see, is your overall sense that national unity is on the rise?
Let me answer the first part of your question, and then remind me if I don't talk about the second part, because the second part is also very important. What I would say about the objective of what's happening is not even regime change. Regime change is meaningless, I think, for the imperialists, for regarding a country like Iran. I think you can have regime change in Syria because there was a regime that was problematic, or you can have regime change in, I don't know, Libya, and it was achieved, and so on. But really, I think about the problem they have with Iran is that Iran is an old country. It's one of the longest continuously existing nation states on this planet. We are a people that has not been created by the imperialists. We've had a consistent nation states within the bounds of what is the contemporary Iran since the Safavid, which about 400 years ago. I should double check my dates, but roughly, let's say 400 years ago. And I think the big problem they have with Iran is that Iran cannot be reduced to one ethnicity. It cannot be reduced to one religion. I mean, to some extent, religion, yes, because an absolute majority are Shia Muslim. But language, there's a diversity of languages, diversity of ethnicities. And Iran has, throughout history, been home to different ethnicities and different nations, even some have argued different peoples, but all the different peoples have called Iran home. This is, I think, a concept of a country that they want to erase. They want all the countries in the region to be modeled after Israel. This is the way I think about it. Israel is an ethno-state that is rapidly moving towards fascism. And I think that it goes along with being an ethno-state, because when you define a state for just one ethnicity, you're gonna get the kinds of fascistic treatments of other people that we're seeing on steroids in Israel. As we've seen, it's not the Israeli racism doesn't just apply to Palestinians who they've kicked out of their lands and so on. It applies to all people who are not Jewish and not white to some extent. And I think this is what they want for Iran as well. So in short, what I would say is this is about the balkanization. You can say balkanization, you can say splitting it into nonsensical countries, essentially drawing borders, kind of a belated Sykes-Picot that they couldn't have back in the time of the after the first World War. They could not split up Iran. They did try. They tried to draw a line just across the middle of Iran and basically have Russia take over the northern part and the British take over the southern part. But it failed because of the Soviet Revolution. Russia pulled out, and Iran is too big. It's geographically complex, and Iranians are fighters, have been throughout history. So I don't think what's happening is about the Islamic Republic. I don't think it's about just wanting a different regime. I think it's about the existence of a country like Iran that is so unwieldy. They can't deal with it. And Iranians want independence because we have this culture of we're I don't want to sound arrogant, or I'm trying to put it in a way that sounds that does justice to the concept. Um, but I think we're proud people. This just in short, in the simplest terms, we're proud people, and we have a hard time with being under the thumb of imperialists. And I think we saw the reaction, the anger and the reaction of Iranian people to having lived that way for decades in the 1979 revolution. Now, the government that came out of that and so on, there's a lot of criticism to be had of the last 40 years. But fundamentally, I believe that we've had, to a good extent, we've had independence, and we've kept the integrity, the territorial integrity of our country, both of which are a threat to the colonizers who want a different kind of Middle East, who want a different kind of world where something like Iran doesn't exist at all. Like, I think a lot about the whole concept of there is no alternative. They want a world where every country, every people looks exactly the same as them, is modeled after them, it listens to them, is under their thumb, under their control, and there is no alternative. There is not even a concept of an alternative where people can point to and be like, hey, Iran is doing it differently, maybe we can as well. Like, they want to remove the idea even. So yeah, I think if Iran loses this war, there is not going to be an Iran. I really believe that. I don't think it makes sense for them to install some kind of new regime, because Iran is also very vast territorially, and like I said, diversity of ethnicities and people. And I think it's very hard to maintain a central government at all, especially if that central government is imposed from outside.
If I may just
Uh,
intercede there, it sounds like what you're saying, Sarah, is that in your opinion, this war is existential for the Iranian nation.
that's what I think,
And
100%.
do you think that this is a view that is widely held amongst the Iranian people today? That what the view you just articulated?
I think, well, okay, so let me return to the second question you asked me
Yeah.
and then answer this one as well. I think what we've been seeing in the last 5 days is an incredible um, sense of unity amongst Iranians that we have not had for decades, at least for the last 15 to 20 years, especially, I want to say, since the so-called Green Revolution of 2009. Um, the country has been very much divided and bitterly, very bitterly fighting over um, the just the very even existence of Iran, fighting over what Iran is, who Iran is for. And there's just been a lot of divisions in the community, in the diaspora community, inside Iran. But suddenly, over the last 5 days, and you know what? I want to thank the colonizers for this. I want to thank Israelis for directly attacking us in such a savage way while Iran was engaged in the negotiations. So Iran was basically in a position where it's showing complete and total good faith and is hoping for a good result out of the negotiations. And I can tell you the consensus in Iran was very much like, we need a deal. People wanted a deal. So every time there were good news about the negotiations, there was, it would show, usually which it shows in the rate of the Iranian currency goes up and down based on the relationship with the West. So, Iranian currency would go up or down based on, the outcome of each round of negotiations. And I can tell you, people were holding their breath for this deal to be finalized, so they can have quote unquote normal lives. And for this kind of blatant deception and basically just pulling the rug from under our feet, and the trust that we had in just the process itself, I think a lot of people were offended by that. I think a lot of people were hurt by that. And even the people who were pretty pro-West, I think, saw what the real deal was, saw what was actually happening, that there was never going to be a deal. The negotiations were just a sham. Now, this is someone I consider myself pretty left, so a lot of people may not uh, necessarily think this way, but what I'm seeing now is a lot of people are coming to a similar understanding to what I believe, which to me is I wish that had happened sooner, and I wish it had happened in a way that didn't put us in a situation of fighting for our existence now. But the fact that we have found this unity, and the fact that people have become aware of what we're actually facing in terms of the barbarity of the Israelis and the Trump administration, I think that's a positive for us, at least a long-term positive for Iranians.
Mhm. You mentioned earlier in your answer to my question that the savages bombed the state broadcaster. Um, I've been meaning to ask you this. You and I, when we met uh, last month, I think it was in connection with a panel that I was speaking on in a large building in this sprawling complex in northern Tehran where the state broadcaster is situated. Many different buildings, but there was one particularly big one. Did they destroy the building where you and I met, or was this uh, another building on that sprawling complex?
Yeah, so the building they hit is the large glass. It's called the glass building, actually. You may remember walking past it, or walking over the hill that looked over the building in the large sort of campus. But we weren't inside that building. Inside that building are studios and their recording programs and so on. We were in the hall that's like conference hall, reception hall. Um, so we weren't inside that building, but that building itself is considered a one of the it was built in the Pahlavi era, and it's one of the architectures of Tehran that is significant, or remarkable architectures of Tehran that is from the same era. And there are quite a few buildings that were built in that era, in the 50s, I believe, that had very distinct architecture, and it was preserved over time, and it was put to use as basically the recording studio for the state TV. And that building, the last report that I saw, the building itself is standing, but inside everything has burned.
Do they know what presumably people were killed in that monstrous crime? Do they know what the casualty toll is, the dead and wounded?
I didn't hear a number specific to that building, but I did hear two names at least,
Were they
unfortunately. And one
journalists?
one was a journalist, or actually, I think there were two journalists that I heard, and one driver was also
Mhm,
killed.
mhm. Now, Sarah, the not too far from where you used to live in Canada, the leaders of the Genocide Seven, as I like to call them, assembled last week, the G7, and at the end of it issued a statement about Israel's criminal war of aggression on Iran. Of course, that's not how they describe it. And in their statement, they basically made two assertions. The one assertion was that Israel has a right to defend itself. They said nothing about Iran's right to defend itself. And the second was an assertion that Iran is the principal source of instability and terror in the region. I'm interested in your reaction to the Genocide Seven's statement as an Iranian watching these horrors being inflicted upon your country.
Yeah, before I give you my reaction to that, I want to tell you something about your earlier question about why I left Canada, which I forgot to mention. I forgot to mention then. Um, my final decision to leave Canada and not come back came actually after the Ukraine war started. And I remember the way, just literally from the morning after the start of the war, it felt like Canada and all these imperialist Western countries were getting into some kind of an arrangement of war sort of arrangement for war. I remember on CBC, it was this specific line every single morning. The news hour on CBC started with, "We begin in Ukraine." And there was this super thick, heavy laying in of the propaganda that, the sob story about Ukraine. I mean, I'm sad about what's happening to Ukrainian people, but at the same time, the propaganda was so in your face that my feeling as an Iranian, as someone who obviously isn't from the West, who could be a suspect at any point, who could become a suspect at any point, my feeling was one of fear, and fear for immigrants, fear for racialized people, as this country was kind of getting itself into a formation for war against the entirety of the Eastern world. Um, as at the time it was represented by Russia, but of course since then the genocide and so on. Since the beginning of that war, my feeling was I need to get out of Canada. I was also thinking a lot of how Japanese people in Canada as well as the US were put into concentration camps after Pearl Harbor. I was thinking about the history of how these countries have dealt with their wars and how all of the laws and all of the rights just completely they all just go out the window. And I was feeling increasingly insecure just being in Canada as someone who is never going to get in line with that kind of bullshit. And at the same time, as an Iranian, I felt that I will be asked eventually to stand against my country, and I could never do that. So one incentive for me to just be in Iran was to just be in a place where I don't have to betray my own country. And I'm really glad today, looking at the state of the Iranian diaspora in Canada and the US, there are a lot of people who are engaged in this kind of disgusting display of joy over their fellow citizens being killed because they think Israel is gonna deliver them a free Iran, or all that bullshit that they fed to us over the years. It's so despicable and so desperate at this point because it's so obvious what's happening. How can you fall for a propaganda? How can you fail an open book test? That's where we're at this point. Now the G7 thing, it's I'll tell you the reaction that I'm seeing a lot of people, a lot of my family members for sure. My mom, my aunts, they all lived through the Iran-Iraq war in the 1980s. A very common sentiment I'm hearing is flashback to that war. Now, you could compare, you could make the case that Iraq war was also an imperialist war on Iran. It was just done through Iraq. But it made it a little difficult to understand because, it's this Arab country attacking the Muslims on like the Sunni Shia or the like the pan-Arab versus the Persian nationalists or what have you. So it was obfuscated. The actual reason for why that war happened and the actual imperialist incentives were obfuscated. But this one is very obvious. It's very blatant. The intents are very clear. But the fact that people are having flashbacks to that war, what it tells me is that on the level of instinct, the gut instinct, it's the same thing happening. And one very specific feature of the Iraq attack on Iran was that the whole world lined up behind Iraq. The whole world. It was no one supported. I mean, yes, some countries did, but in general, it was the entire West against Iran. And I think people really felt that. I think our people really felt how alone Iran was. And now we're feeling that again. And now we're feeling like how much injustice and lies and deception there is in the world. Of course you know that, but then when it comes to something like this, it feels even more heart-wrenching because how can you be just this horrible? I don't know what to say. It all sounds so simple because it is so simple. It's so simple that you have a country that's defending itself and then it's being smeared all over. back then, same thing. You had a country, just had a revolution. It was in a state where they felt, oh, the country's going to be fragile, weak, and we can take over. We can take away some land. It was the same idea again. They were trying to separate the southwest part of Iran, and they were doing it through Iraq. Now they're doing it through Israel. Um, but I think on the level of psyche, Iranians have gotten used to being alone in the world, and we've gotten used to not being seen, not being heard, not being humanized, and that's why there are a lot of attempts, at least, to report on the human casualties, human face of the war and the casualties, and to humanize the especially the civilians who are dying. Um, because I don't think we can live through that again. I think it will be very hard for us to be dehumanized over and over the same way we were during the Iraq War. But yeah, I mean, no one's surprised. I can tell you that. No one's surprised that no country is coming to Iran's defense. I am positively surprised, I'll tell you, that the Islamic countries have issued a statement in unison in support for Iran. That's very heartwarming. And the fact that all the divisions in the Muslim world are being put aside to come out against this savage aggressor, that's really incredible. And I think Pakistan especially has lent a great deal of support to Iran. So those are really positive and heartwarming
Yeah,
developments.
right.
But the G7, no one expected different.
Yes, I understand completely. I just want to add before we conclude our discussion, Sarah, that although uh, Iran might be alone at the governmental level, I have no doubt, based on everything I've seen and heard over the last 5 days, people who are commenting on our videos, people who are, engaging in social media about this war of aggression on Iran, that there are billions, and I say billions of people around the world who stand in solidarity with Iran right now. If the attitudes of their governments were reflected in popular sentiment, particularly in the non-Western world, but I think also in large swaths of the Western world, then there would be many governments aligned with Iran right now. So I think it's important to draw a distinction between what we're seeing at the level of the state and what we're seeing at the level of the grassroots around this world, because I'm hearing nothing but enthusiastic support for the people of Iran, and I think there are a lot of people out there who would like to see it once and for all put an end to this genocidal entity and its depraved crimes. I think the world's had enough. So
I hope we
personally,
can.
yeah, and
Yeah.
of course, the challenge is great, and the entirety of the West is lining up behind the genocidal entity, and in fact, is just an instrument through which they are trying to destroy your country. Um,
Yeah.
but again, I can't reiterate that I think a lot of people out there are rooting for the Iranian people.
I'm getting a bit of that being here in Egypt, because people are so excited about the Iranian attacks on Israel. And basically, whenever I tell someone that I'm from Iran, there's just this incredible outpouring of support and enthusiasm, which is new for me. Being Iranian, traveling in the world, we don't usually get that kind of treatment. Yeah. I
Sounds
wanted
like
to tell you one anecdote though that I forgot, and it's kind of important because I'm sure a lot of your listeners are going to think, what about the Islamic regime, and what about, do I support the government and all that? And we did talk about that briefly, but this story really stuck with me after they attacked the TV station, the state TV. I think maybe you remember when we met in the adjacent building. I had a lot of trouble getting into that building
I
because
remember
I
this.
was I was wearing a shirt that I didn't even realize, but the sleeve was like up to here, and so these women at the door were like, you're not dressed properly, you can't get inside. I'm sorry, we can't allow." They were polite, but they were like, "You don't pass the standards for this place." I eventually got in because there were multiple gates, and I finally got someone to accompany me, and I got in. But obviously, I felt really unwelcome, and I felt like this space is not for people like me, and all of that. But then when they hit the state TV, and I think this short clip from the anchor, the lady who was the anchor, went viral, and she was doing this thing. She was like, we won't be subjugated with this finger thing that we do a lot in Iran. I looked at that and I was like, I'm an Iranian woman saying no at the door when I was being basically told to dress otherwise. And this is also an Iranian woman saying no to the imperialists. And we're all the same when it comes to attacks on our country. And I really sympathized with that gesture and the way she presented herself. And I think she really represented the Iranian woman in that moment, despite all the divisions in our country and despite everything that we've been through because of those divisions in the last decades. It's really important for people to understand that a lot of Iranian people understand this is an attack on their country, not on their government, not on their the IRGC, on the nuclear program, what have you. We understand when you hit residential areas, you kill innocent people. And by the way, it's been more than 500 casualties so far that have been killed in Iran just in less than a week. This is a horrendous number. People have no problem understanding what's going on. So we stand with our country.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today, my friend. And I wish you and your family and friends safety and prosperity. And, I hope we can continue this conversation in a few days or weeks' time as this extraordinarily dangerous situation unfolds. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. Thanks for talking about my country.
And this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Montreal, Canada on June 18th, 2025.